So I wanted to, before we kick straight into, before we dive into too many other current events, I actually wanted to go to a interesting read, which I've not done before. So we hear about human rights violations somewhat regularly, but when we hear of them, we only think of like the most egregious kinds, you know, torture and things like that. Yeah, slave trading. And while those are all human rights violations, I was curious, what are the agreed upon human rights? So over the weekend, I actually went over and I read the Universal Declaration of Human Rights by the United Nations, and it is a very interesting document. And a lot more things are human rights violations that are commonplace here than we care to admit. Yeah, so let me actually switch over. So this is showing, yeah, let me zoom in a little bit so it's legible. Okay. This is just off the UN.org site. It's not legible? Okay, the little stuff above that. Okay, 450 say it's not legible. Maybe that's more legible? Can push it more, maybe? Okay, well, I'll be reading it along anyway. I just wanted to show it while we were reading along. So the preamble is basically just a declaration of intent with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Yes, Shalun, I would say all of the Allied powers had a very strong hand in this, but yeah, I would say the US probably pushed some of these points in particular. But yeah, it basically says there's certain inalienable rights of all members of the human family, the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. I'm not going to get through the whole preamble. If you want to read it, you can. It's basically a declaration of intent of what this document is for and why it's needed, and a commitment from all member nations of we're going to abide by this. But we start real simple with Article 1. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with a reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. Very broad just for the opening one. I'm not really gonna complain about that. Like, we're fine generally. I just mean in the sense that it's usually China, US, Russia, yeah. And given their history, it's, well, yeah, that's probably true. Article 2. Everyone is entitled to all the rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration without distinction of any kind, such as race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status. Furthermore, no distinction shall be made on the basis of the political, jurisdictional, or international status of the country or territory to which a person belongs, whether it be independent, trust, non-self-governing, or under any other limitation of sovereignty. Article 2 basically expands on Article 1, outlining no discrimination should be tolerated, period, no matter what, regardless of where you're from, who you are, what you believe, anything. Discrimination is not tolerated, is a human rights violation unto itself. Article 3 is right to life, liberty, and security of person. This is kind of reminiscent of, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Security of person is a more general way of saying that. Yeah, I would agree with that, Shellen. Our immigration system definitely discriminates and it gets into what's interesting is it makes very broad strokes, and that's why I'm not pausing here. Is these start with very broad strokes, but it actually gets into finer and finer detail on how these things should, particular methods that should happen to prevent that discrimination from taking place. Which is, but you're entirely correct to point that out. Like, not only with the way we handle immigrants, but the way we handle indigenous peoples, with the way that even with the way we handle just people of color who are citizens here. No one shall be held in slavery or servitude. Slavery and slave trade shall be prohibited in all their forms. There's cases to be made where capitalism violates this in general, but I'll give that a pass just because this is probably a more strict definition of slavery, so fine. Article 5. No one shall be subjected to torture or to cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. Obviously, we do see this in prisons, and especially in our border prisons, as we've discussed. This one is the one that most people think of when they think of human rights violations. Article 5. Because it's very easy to see how that's a violation. Did they get rid of Guantanamo? No. Guantanamo is still operating. Obama had set up a plan near the end of his term to have it closed. He finally got a plan approved and pushed through to close it. Unfortunately, it didn't happen in his term, and Trump scrapped that, so Guantanamo is still operating. It took Obama way too long on that. Article 6. This is where it starts getting more specific. Everyone has the right to recognition everywhere as a person before the law. This is expanded on in Article 7. All are equal before the law, are entitled, without any discrimination, to equal protection of the law. All are entitled to equal protection against any discrimination in violation of this declaration and against any incitement to such discrimination. This is where it starts getting real shaky for the US. We do not have equality before the law. We absolutely see racial and class discrimination in how the law is applied in the United States. We see it over and over again. It is baked into our system. But this by itself is a human rights violation. It doesn't have to be being tortured. It is just simply you are not actually given an equal shake by the law. You are not seen in on equal terms as someone else. That's a human rights violation. They're not as overt, but they are, which I find interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know on waterboarding. It also contradicts the post 9/11 attempt to justify things based on status as citizen, terrorist, etc. Yeah, which it gets further into even as we're going along, because there's several that deal with this. It starts off with these very broad ones, and then, Article 8. Everyone has the right to an effective remedy by the competent national tribunals for acts violating the fundamental rights granted him by the Constitution or by law. Okay. No one shall be subjected to arbitrary arrest, detention, or exile. Like, a lot of these are all together. But yeah, you can't tell me the US does not do this. We know, we have seen time and time again where people are just arrested because they're black or because they're crossing the border and trying to declare asylum. Or, yeah, Article 9 is a big oof. We absolutely do arbitrary arrests. Everyone's entitled to full equality to a fair and public hearing by an independent and impartial tribunal in the determination of his rights and obligations and of any criminal charge against him. This, I'm going to read alongside Article 11. Everyone charged with a penal offense has the right to be presumed innocent until proven guilty, according to the law, in a public trial at which he has had all the guarantees necessary for his defense. And point 2, no one shall be held guilty of a penal offense on account of any act or omission which did not constitute a penal offense, national or international law at the time it was committed. Nor shall a heavier penalty be imposed than the one that was applicable at the time the offense was committed. Now, we don't have a presumption of innocence in a lot of cases here. If we did, we could never, ever have our law enforcement officers executing people before arresting them. And that, like, what's the offense that we see in whenever the police get violent is, oh well, he was a criminal or he was doing something wrong. That is not acceptable. And starting from that premise is not only wrong, it is a human rights violation, according to a treaty that we helped draft and signed. It is a human rights violation to presume that someone is guilty. Yeah, Castor. Exactly. Additionally, in this case, everyone's entitled to, a fair and public hearing by an independent and impartial tribunal. This is like a jury. It's the general term for a jury. We do not afford this to immigrants and such who we are detaining. We are not only not processing their asylum request, we're not accepting their asylum request, we are presuming them guilty and then denying them any hearing to assess guilt, to determine any crime. In some cases, I think there's a very strong argument to be made that this combination, Articles 9 through 11, would find that the bail system itself is a human rights violation. It puts someone under arrest without determining their guilt before they've had a public fair hearing by an independent and impartial tribunal. I think that there's a very strong case to be made there, because you can hold people for months, having leveled a charge against them that you have not actually tried. I think there's a lot of problems with that. We're going along. No one shall be subjected to arbitrary interference with his privacy, family, home, or correspondence, nor to attacks upon his honor or reputation. Everyone has the right to the protection of the law against such interference or attacks. This one I don't see us having too terribly much of a problem here, per se. Hard to say. I'm not entirely sure what this one is talking about entirely. Which I think I said entirely too many times there. Anyway. Admittedly, it's arbitrary interference. Is this... Well, I don't know. Is a case of this like when cops constantly harass someone? Is this when someone's character gets impugned by the state? Like, we do see this happen sometime. For example, like Breonna Taylor comes to mind. There was a huge effort to, after she was executed, justify the execution by impugning her character, her family, to just tread all over her privacy and drag it out in public. Does that fall under this? I'm not sure. I'm not entirely sure. It could. Certainly, those things were problematic and had nothing to do with the cops killing her. Article 13 starts to, and 14, actually all these next ones, get into the immigration question. And we are really out of line here. So we start off, everyone has the right to freedom of movement and residence within the borders of each state. Fair enough. Everyone has the right to leave any country, including his own, and to return to his country. Now we're seeing us preventing citizens from returning to this country. We're also seeing, we've heard this administration try to tell, like, Mexico to prevent people from crossing the border. Well, that's not how that works. Everyone has a right to leave a country. Period. Your ability to emigrate is assured because the conditions may not be tolerable. And any country that is trying to prevent their own people from leaving is out of line. Article 14 brings up the asylum thing. Everyone has the right to seek and to enjoy in other countries asylum from persecution. Not here. Not here. This right may not be invoked in the case of prosecutions genuinely arising from non-political crimes or contrary to the purposes and principles of the United Nations. Now, that's saying they can't, like, they can't just be a criminal in a country and then flee. But in general, we absolutely should be allowing people to declare asylum here and to enjoy protection from persecution here as a result of that. That is an assured universal human right that we agreed to. Heard Trump say that he is not sure what he'll do if he loses. He may just leave the country. I wouldn't be surprised if he did, but I don't know where he would go. And I don't think Russia is a good choice for him because they have no more use for him if he's out of power. Shaloon. Yeah, Trump followers are not going to actually go to Canada. They talk a big game. Everyone has a right to a nationality, and no one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his nationality, nor denied the right to change his nationality. Which is, what's interesting here is it does depend on how you cut this question. But we hear sometimes, the threat of depriving someone of citizenship or of limiting the powers of citizenship, which is something we have here in Florida, where felons, well, previously were denied the right to vote. Now they just have to navigate a impossible legal system to be able to vote. Thank you, DeSantis, but also thank you, Bloomberg, for actually paying people's fines so that they actually can have their vote restored. I recognize that right to vote is not necessarily the same thing as nationality, but there's some odd things there. Men and women of full age without any limitation due to race, nationality, or religion have the right to marry and found a family. They're entitled to equal rights as to marriage, during marriage, and at its dissolution. Will be entered into only with the free and full consent of intending spouses, and so, they are just asserting that marriage and family is a thing that's important. Don't we, the US, have laws against hate speech? No, they don't specify what full age is. There might be a definition somewhere. Or it might just be something that's determined based on society. Yeah. I'm not sure what our hate speech laws actually cover, because they don't seem to cover very much. I'm not sure. Because we have a lot of hate speech. It seems that no, hate speech is protected by the First Amendment in the United States, and we do not have a legal definition of hate speech under US law, and you are allowed to be spreading hate speech. The only place where it crosses the line is if you are threatening clear and present danger to someone. So, yeah. Everyone has the right to alone as well as in association with others, and no one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his property. We have a whole system by which police who suspect someone of a crime can take their stuff, even without successfully charging them. We also have eminent domain, which allows the state to take property arguably arbitrarily. So I think Article 17 we're not very strong on. They do not have to have a successful conviction before they can take property. Yep. Forcible seizure is when the government or law enforcement official can seize property from someone who is suspected of violating the law. It requires only that they be a suspect. And there are cases, where a warrant allows them just to do a search and seizure. It's pretty broad what is covered under these. Right. I'm not talking about evidence of the crime. I'm talking about where they can seize a lot of things just kind of at law enforcement discretion if they have a warrant to do a search and seizure. No, not for the items specifically, just to do one. Our laws on this are very, very broad and get abused. Oh yeah. Yeah. Some really fucked up stuff on this one on search and seizure. Yeah, it's gotten really out of hand too. When we first put those laws in place, it seemed to be done generally in good faith, more or less, and the amounts that were taken tended to be kind of low. But now we've been taking a lot of wealth, and even on not filing, not actually completing the charge or finding the person guilty, not all things are returned. So, yeah. Obviously, freedom of religion and of thought is important. This one, I would actually say we're generally okay on. We have some rough patches with Islam, but mosques do operate. Muslims do practice their faith, both in private and public. There isn't a concerted effort to stop it, so I'd say we're kind of okay here. And same on right to freedom of opinion and expression, kind of. Obviously this, insofar as protests go, we've gotten really bad about. But actually being able to express opinions in general, we're okay on. This is where we're not okay. Article 20 expands on the right to your freedoms of opinion and says you have the freedom of peaceful assembly and association. We are cracking down on peaceful protests. No one may be compelled to belong to an association. That's fair. We're not in violation there, but we're definitely not good here. Human right. Freedom of peaceful assembly. Oh, you're feeding a cat? Catnap. That's a neat catnap. This we get way out of whack on. Article 21. So, technically, everyone has the right to take part in government in his country, directly or through freely chosen representatives. That one's fine. Everyone has the right of equal access to public service in his country. No. No, we definitely have tiers of access based on various privileges, whether that be wealth, belonging to the correct, race, what have you. Our public services are restricted to the privileged, for certain. And we do have elections, so we're fine there. But this one, no. This is to... So, I guess this is specifically to public service, like in serving in the government. We don't have laws against it, But I really, really do see, like, you really do see only certain people getting lifted up and others being gate kept out of the system. Everyone as a member of society has the right to social security and is entitled to realization, national effort, and international cooperation, and in accordance state of the economic, social, and cultural rights indispensable for his dignity and redevelopment of his personality. Social security gets expanded down here. Where this is a general declaration, and in Article 13 they say everyone has the right to work, to free choice of employment, to just and favorable conditions of work, and to protection against unemployment. And no, our protections against unemployment have been getting worse and worse, as have our conditions of work. Oh, Brainless has been gifted us up. Nice. Strictly speaking, people do have free choice of an employment, but yeah. This part continues to not be true. Everyone without any discrimination has right to equal pay for equal work. We consistently see white people and males paid more for the same work done by non-whites or females. So that definitely is not happening here. Ensuring himself and his family an existence worthy of human dignity, and supplemented if necessary by other means of social protection. So this is saying everyone as a human right should be given a living wage, a comfortable wage that keeps you above poverty. If you can't get that as a wage, you should have it through other social programs. We don't have that. That is not something. We're seeing more and more people slipping into poverty in this nation as the cost of living continue to shoot up and the wages stay flat. Everyone has the right to form and join trade unions for the protection of his interests. This is something that we went off on last week. Trade unions, inscribed as a human right. We agreed to these terms. But we sure don't allow trade unions to do much, and we have been suppressing them as much as possible. Right to rest and leisure, including reasonable limitations on working hours and periodic holidays with pay. Anyone who's worked at Blizzard or anything can say that this is not true. There you go, Shalun. Yeah, today you learned Bezos literally violating universal human rights. Absolutely. Article 25 gets into some really interesting stuff. Everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself and his family, including food, clothing, housing, and medical care, and necessary social services, and the right to security in the event of unemployment, sickness, disability, widowhood, old age, or other lack of livelihood in circumstances beyond his control. When I read that, that's sums up what a lot of what we argue for. Like, you should have a basic subsistence assured. If things turn south, your option shouldn't just be to lose access to your house, become homeless, and die in the street. You should absolutely have housing assured, access to medical care assured, access to food assured, access to clothing assured. Not just basics either, it should be a standard of living adequate for your health and well-being. This is like this one really hits home for me. And if it were true, would resolve a lot of the other. It would cover all of the a lot of the other things that we're currently in violation of. We definitely do not meet this standard. Motherhood and childhood are entitled to special care and assistance. All children, whether born in or out of wedlock, shall enjoy the same social protection. Yeah. But yeah, Article 25, very, very important article. And is one that we fall flat on. So, when I read this, I learned that those who oppose things like Medicare for all literally standing in the way of us correcting a human rights violation. Like, that's... I don't know how else to read that. We can't gatekeep healthcare behind money. That is a violation. Everyone has the right to education. Education shall be free, at least in the elementary and fundamental stages. Elementary education shall be compulsory. Technical and professional education shall be made generally available, and higher education shall be equally accessible to all on the basis of merit. Obviously, we don't actually give access to higher education based on merit. We give access to higher education based on money. That is our system for university. We do have a program by which people, get their college paid for. I can't think of the word for it for some reason. I know this word, but whatever. But it's not enough. Like, we can't put everyone through college on what is the word? What is the word? Education shall be directed to the scholarship. Thank you, Castor. Yes, that's exactly what I was looking for. Can't put everyone to college on a scholarship. I mean, this is actually a really good system that it lays out. It's a shame that we don't actually follow it. Education... we probably could. We don't. We give out... There's just not nearly enough scholarships that go out. Most of our attendance in college is through who can pay for it. Education shall be directed to the full development of the human personality and to the strengthening of respect for human rights, fundamental freedoms. Shall promote understanding, tolerance, and friendship among all nations, racial or religious groups, and shall further the activities of the United Nations for the maintenance of peace. So, threatening to install nationalism as part of your curriculum is itself a human rights violation. Schools, education should be directed at promoting understanding, tolerance, and friendship. not teaching exceptionalism, not teaching bigotry, not perpetuating these sorts of systems of racial persecution. This is really a nice layout of what an education system should be, and if followed would be a beautiful thing. Parents who have a prior right to choose the kind of education have a prior right to choose the kind of education that shall be given to their children. Fair enough. Skeptical of 3, yeah. I think that's just saying that the state can't mandate what school people should go to. You know? That's my read on that. I don't know. Like, because I could see that being a major problem in some countries. That one I don't think we run afoul of. But I could see how it could be problematic as well. Obviously, it only applies when they're children. You know, once you grow to be a full adult, you could technically raise a feral kid under that. Well, kind of. So here's where that you have to read 3 in combination with this. Elementary education shall be compulsory. So they do at least have to fulfill elementary education. Kind of, Consuela, not specifically education. We've been going through what's actually defined as universal human rights, because I hear that term thrown around a lot, and the only ones that I ever heard about or thought about were like torture. But it turns out that education itself is part of universal human rights. Access to food, clothing, shelter, healthcare, all universal human rights. You can't be denied these things based on your circumstances. Thank you. So, yeah, just kind of interesting stuff. Everyone has the right to freely to participate in the cultural life of the community, to enjoy the arts, and to share in scientific advancement and its benefits. Right to the protection of the moral and material interests resulting from any scientific, literary, or artistic production of which he is the author. I don't 100% know how to read Article 27, but I don't think that we are necessarily in violation of this one. We're in violation of a lot of them, but I think we're okay here. Mainly because our obsession with private property keeps us technically on the right side of this. It's not out of benevolence, it's... yeah, I would agree with that, Shalyn. I would agree with that. Oh yeah. We definitely have a better power grid and such. Really need to. Yeah, I think Brenless has it on how it's implemented technically. But to enjoy and to share in scientific advancement and its benefits. I think that this is what, like, I agree this covers patents, but I think this covers people really should, if they are part of the community, have access to some of the advancements that are available to everyone. Or, you know, should be available to everyone. There's a case to be made there for sure. This one's a little bit more gray than some of the others. Everyone's entitled to a social and international order in which the rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration can be fully realized, as we have discussed. We are in gross violation of several of these, so we don't have that here. Some of them we are fine on. Some of them we are way out of line on. So, everyone has duties to the community in which alone the free and full development of his personality is possible. In the exercise of his rights and freedoms, everyone shall be subject only to such limitations as are determined by law, solely for the purpose of securing due recognition and respect for the rights and freedoms of others, of meeting the just requirements of morality, public order, and the general welfare in a democratic society. Rights and freedoms may in no case be exercised contrary to the purposes and principles of the United Nations. That one is kind of very, very broad statement, reiterating. Like, I read these last two as kind of being the bottom bread of a human rights sandwich. The first ones were very broad strokes, then a bunch of details, and this is just reiterating kind of the first points that everyone should have access to these and should exercise them kind of responsibly, and in particular in recognition and respect for the rights and freedoms of others. So in pursuing your own, in exercising your own rights, you cannot infringe on others, basically. That's my read on that. Nothing in this declaration may be interpreted as implying for any state, group, or person any right to engage in any activity or to perform any act aimed at the destruction of any of the rights and freedoms set forth herein. Again, you know, you can exercise your rights, but should not infringe upon others their rights. So it was kind of a long read, but switch back over here. I felt this was kind of necessary to solve a gap in my own knowledge, and thought y'all might find it interesting as well. Because I didn't actually know, when we talk about human rights, all the different things that it actually covers. And all the things it covers kind of lays out a very strong foundation for a society to be built on, which, you know, that's the idea of it, but that's, yeah, it covers a lot of different aspects.